Hi guys, welcome to class. Today we're going to cover the remaining of chapter 2 in microeconomics. I believe we got up to page or slide 20, so we'll get started from there. All right, so elasticities of supply and demand. We started talking about this. Might have got one or two slides ahead, but elasticity is a percentage change in one variable resulting from a percent change in another. So price elasticity of demand is the primary one. Let's call that the core equation. These equations are all change in quantity over change in price, or change in quantity over change in X. If a good, looking at this formula one more time, if the change in quantity is greater than the change in price, it will be elastic. If the change in quantity is less than the change in price, that item would be inelastic. Think about that logically for a second. If the change in price in gasoline is 20%, and the change in quantity demanded is only 1%, it's pretty inelastic, right? Now, if we're talking about something else like change in price of steak, the quantity demanded in steak, if the change in price of steak was 20%, we would probably see the price of steak go down, or the quantity of steak go down by more than 20%. Because why? People have options, they have other choices. Linear demand curve. We talked about this a little bit about this last class, but basically we have a downward sloping demand curve. I used hot dogs in a baseball stadium. You only have a certain capacity to eat a certain amount of hot dogs or number of cars for a family of 4. That would also shift down where there's a high demand for that first car, but less of a demand for a second and a third car. Infinitely elastic demand. So this is for horizontal demand curve. Changing Q over change in P is infinite because a tiny change in price leads to an enormous change in demand. The elasticity of demand is infinite. So, these are things that are very, very sensitive to price changes. I can't think of one at the top of my head at this second, but think about something. If you raise the price by $1, no one buys it, right? Infinitely elastic demand principle that consumers will buy as much of a good as they can get at a single price, but any higher in the demand drops to zero. While for any lower price, the quantity demanded increases without limit. Then you have completely inelastic demand. For this, I use gasoline as a good example, but even gasoline at a certain price becomes elastic. We'll change our driving habits and we'll reduce our desire to drive. Income elasticity. I think this is primarily where we left off last class, but income elasticity of demand, the percentage change in quantity demanded resulting from 1% increase in income. So for this, what would you buy more of when you make more money? And conversely, what do you buy less of when you make more money? There's also cross elasticity of demand. Percent change in the quantity demanded of one good resulted from a percent change in the price of another. So cross elasticity of demand would be related to things like a 20% change in the price of hamburger meat changes the quantity of hamburger buns by what percentage? There's also elasticities of supply. So percentage change in quantity supplied resulting from a 1% increase in price. So, if they raise the price, do more people come to market? Does any other buyers or sellers come to market when the price goes up? Theoretically, you would think so, right? If the price goes up, more people will sell that good. But if there's a monopoly on that good being sold and they raise the price, nothing actually changes. Point versus arc elasticities. Point elasticity of demand, that's price elasticity at a particular point on the demand curve. And the arc elasticity of demand is the price elasticity calculated over a range of prices. So this relates to specifically the gas conversation we had, where I mentioned to you that the gas is pretty inelastic within a certain price range. But gas prices go to $20 a gallon. Believe me, it will become way more elastic, right? The market for wheat during recent decades, changes in the wheat market had major implications for both American farmers and U.S. agricultural policy. To understand what happened, let's examine the behavior of supply and demand beginning in 1981. So it's showing here quantity supply is 1800 plus 240p. It's an algebraic equation here that they're using. And the demand is quantity demanded over 3550 minus 266p, p being the price. And that's effectively, those numbers in front of the p is effectively setting the price sensitivity. By setting quantity supplied equal to the quantity demanded, we can determine the market clearing price of wheat in 1981 is 346 a bushel by basically using algebra to solve that equation. Substituting in the supply curve equation, we get Q equals 1800 plus 240 times 3.46 equals 2630 million bushels. And that would, be the market clearing, part of the equation. Like, what could they sell without over or under supplying the market? Market for wheat, we can use the demand curve to find price elasticity of demand. So it's just saying here the 3.46 divided by 2630 minus 266 equals negative 0.35. Thus, the demand is inelastic. Easy rule of thumb here, guys. Elasticity number, if we calculate elasticity to be less than 1, it is inelastic. We can likewise calculate the price elasticity of supply. The supply of wheat is also inelastic. If you think about that, that makes perfect logical sense. You can only get wheat of supply that you planted 6 months ago, right? So it's extremely difficult to bring on new supply. So in the short run, the supply of wheat is what it is, right? It's very inelastic. Suppose that a drought causes the supply curve to shift far enough to the left to push the price up to $4 a bushel. In this case, the quantity demanded would fall to 24.86 bushels. At this price in quantity, the elasticity of demand would be 0.43. So we've seen that it's still inelastic, but less so. In 2007, the demand and supply were 2900 minus 125p. So this stuff can also not only change, it can change with time too. Maybe in this 2007 world, there's more soybeans available as an alternative to eat something. The market clearing nominal price and quantity are 1460 plus 115p equals 2900 minus 125p. That comes up to 346 bushel at 2150 million bushels. Dry weather can cause heavy rains combined with an increased export demand, cause the price to rise considerably. You can check to see that in 2007 price and quantity, the price elasticity of demand was negative 0.35 and the price elasticity of supply is 0.32. Given these low elasticities, it is not surprising that the price of wheat rose so sharply. Frankly, there's just too tight of supply and demand is inelastic, meaning you need the wheat for the cereal and there's only a certain amount. So, it can have big price fluctuations. The price of wheat in the US, we can see here that, this is over a decent time horizon. We should always focus on the real price because that backs out inflation. Backs out inflation. But, in 1980, wheat was close to 6. Then in 2000, it was close to 3. That's a 50% drop over 20 years, right? But even in, 1995, the price was, almost double what it was in 2000. And then back again in, call it 2010, wheat's back at 6. And then in 2017, it's back at 3. So in terms of real dollars, wheat seems to float between $3 and $6 adjusted for inflation. Gasoline short run and long run. In the short run, an increase in the price has only had a small effect. Motorists may drive less, but will not change the kinds of cars they are driving. However, in the long run, you have a long period of time of higher gas prices. We'll have more electric cars. Demand for electric cars goes up, so people pay more for them. So people see that profit opportunity, and what do? They'll decide to build more electric cars, and then maybe it becomes more efficient, right? To do that. Automobiles, short run and long run demand curves. The opposite is true for auto demand. If price increases, the consumer will initially defer the purchase. Thus, an annual quantity demanded falls sharply. So, they can't raise the price of the Honda Civic by 10K without demand falling. But they can do that with gasoline, theoretically. In the longer run, however, older cars wear out and must be replaced. Thus, annual quantity demanded picks up. Demand, therefore, is less elastic in the long run than in the short run. So, you can defer the purchase of a car, but you'll still always need it. Income elasticities also differ from the short to the long run. For most goods and services, foods, beverages, fuel, and entertainment, and so on, the income elasticity of demand is larger in the long run than the short run. For durable goods, think about like a car, a fridge, anything kind of durable. The short run income elasticity demand will be much larger than the long run elasticity. Like a durable good, you're going to buy a new bed, right? In the short run, the demand for beds is pretty elastic, meaning if the price of a bed went up, you just deferred and use your old bed. But in the long run, everyone pretty much needs a bed. So that's why the short run elasticity is way higher. In the long run, beds are pretty inelastic. And I'm probably using bed as an example because of the time I'm recording this lecture. Cyclical industries. Industries in which sales tend to magnify cyclical changes in GDP and national income. One way to think about it is boat sales usually go up when the economy is good and they go down when the economy is bad, because for the most part, people are buying boats as recreational vehicles. Therefore, they're cyclical. GDP and investment in durable equipment. Durable equipment can also be things like construction equipment, right? Like machinery to build skyscrapers. Annual growth rates are compared for GDP and investment in durable equipment because the short-run GDP elasticity of demand is larger than the long-run elasticity for long-lived capital equipment. Changes in investment in equipment magnify changes in GDP. Thus, capital goods industries are considered cyclical. Just like building equipment. Good example there. Consumption of durables versus non-durables. Annual growth rates compared for GDP, consumer expenditures on durable goods, autos, appliance, furniture, and consumer expenditures on non-durable goods, food, clothing, and services. Because the stock of durable goods is large compared to annual demand, short-run demand elasticities are larger than long-run. Like capital equipment, industries that produce consumer durables are cyclical, i.e., changes in GDP are magnified, right? So most things, and think about this, like these goods, autos, appliances, and furniture can all be deferred, right? You can always defer those purchases. So that's why they're elastic. So sometimes when I mentioned before in class about like, oh, something will be elastic as a substitute. That substitute can also be time. Food, clothing, and services, a lot of times those are less elastic because you need food, you need clothing, you need services. You're going to go to the dentist, doctor, stuff like that. Demand for gasoline. So we're seeing price, number of years allowed to pass following a price or income change for demand for gasoline, and then demand for autos. So we see that the price and income elasticities, are pretty inelastic for gas. And on the demand for auto side, it's very elastic, right? At least compared to gas. The other phenomenon you see here is that elasticity increases in gasoline the longer the time horizon. Why? Because again, you can switch from gas to electric or some other future vehicle over that time horizon. Supply and durability. Copper, short run versus long run. Like most goods, the supply of primary copper is more elastic in the long run. Because in the long run, price of copper goes high, we'll dig a hole in the ground and find a new mine, right? Price of copper is low, we're going to stick with what we have in terms of inventories. If price increases, firms would like to produce more, but are limited by capacity and constraints in the short run. In the long run, they could add capacity and produce more. Like I said, dig a new hole. Part B shows the supply curves for secondary copper. If the price increases, there is greater incentive to convert scrap copper into new supply. Initially, therefore, secondary supply increases sharply. But later, as stock of scrap falls, secondary surplus contracts. Secondary supply is therefore less elastic in the long run than in the short run. And we can see that visualized down at the bottom. Whether in Brazil and the price of coffee in New York, when a drought or freeze or damage Brazil's coffee trees, the price of coffee can soar. Price usually falls again after a few years as demand and supply adjust. A freeze or drought in Brazil causes the supply curve to shift to the left. Remember, supply curve shift to the left means reduced supply. In the short run, just like wheat, you can't produce more. Supply is completely inelastic. Only a fixed number of coffee beans can be harvested. Therefore, demand is also relatively inelastic. Consumers need their coffee and will only change their habits slowly. So, like, how expensive does coffee have to be for your dad to switch from coffee to Red Bull? You know, that number might be pretty high. In the intermediate run, supply and demand are both more elastic. Thus, price falls part of the way back. In the long run, supply is extremely elastic because new coffee trees will have had time to mature. The effect of the freeze will have disappeared. Linear supply and demand curves provide a convenient tool for analysis, given data for the equilibrium price, P and Q, as well as the estimates of elasticities of demand, supply E, D, and ES. We can calculate parameters C and D for the supply curve, A and B for the demand curve. The curves can also be used to analyze the behavior of the market quantitatively, like figuring out, like, hey, if coffee prices go up by X, you know, how does that change things? Understanding predicting effects of changing market conditions. So, you know, when you're pricing a good, we could talk about, and this is like the first time this has happened. I think it actually happened with PlayStation overseas and maybe the Xbox overseas, but they actually raised prices on these consoles. Usually after a year or two of release, they drop the price. You know, demand is obviously so high. They have someone at Microsoft and Sony running these numbers, and they say, hey, you know what? People have been on eBay selling these for $700 for the last 18 months. Why are we selling them for $5? We could effectively sell them for $5.75 and make more money without losing demand. Because the market's already pricing them at $700. I'm making up a number there, but pricing them at $700 because demand is high and supply is short. Behavior of copper prices. After reaching a level about 1 per pound in 1980, the price of copper fell sharply to about 60 cents per pound in 1986. Worldwide recessions in 80 and 82 contribute to the decline in copper prices. Copper's in everything: cars, homes, buildings, everything. Anything that runs electricity. Why did the price rise so sharply after 2003? First, the demand for copper from China and other Asian countries began increasing dramatically, so as to get more development in emerging markets. Second, because the prices had dropped so much before, producers are closed unprofitable mines and cut production. So when copper prices are low, you're not going to go into the really deep mine that's expensive. You'll go into the shallow one. What would a decline in demand do to the price of copper? To find out, we can use the linear supply of demand curves. Copper prices are shown in both nominal and real terms. In real terms, copper prices declined steeply from the early 70s through the mid 80s as demand fell. In 88 and 90, the copper prices rose in response to supply disruptions caused by strikes in Peru and Canada, but later fell when the strikes ended. Prices declined during 96 and 2002 period, but then increased sharply in 2005. What was going on in 2005 in the US? We were in the middle of a housing boom. I remember it must have been between 2005 and 2008. There were stories in the news all the time, probably close to 2007 as homes started getting abandoned, but the price of copper was still high. Yeah, you can see it right here. In 2010, this is after the financial crisis, people were going into vacant homes to steal the copper wire. The shift in the demand curve corresponding to a 20% decline in demand leads to a 10.7% decline in price. Since the early 70s, this is about oil. The world oil market has been buffeted by OPEC cartel and by political turmoil. So like politics in the Middle East, as well as the nation states that sell oil have had a large degree of control over the oil market. That is no longer as true because we went from being a top 50 producer in the world to, either 1, 2, or 3, depending on whose numbers you look at. The OPEC cartel and political events caused the price of oil to rise sharply at times. It later fell as supply and demand adjusted. Also, these countries constantly cheat each other. They're like, all right, we're all going to agree to sell 1 million barrels a day, right? And then someone else is like, we'll sell 1.1 million. Then all of a sudden, because of the cheating, you have extra supply, drops prices. Because this example is set in 2009 and 2011, all prices are measured in 2011 dollars. The world price of oil is $80 a barrel, pretty similar where it is today. World demand and supply, 32 billion barrels per year. OPEC supplied about a third of those, and then the rest coming from a variety of other countries outside the Middle East. So in the long run, the world supply is more elastic, and then competitive supply also in the long run is more elastic because, we don't do it as much anymore. But, you'd have these like deep sea oil rigs, which you're building an oil drill in the middle of the ocean floor. Those are like the most expensive ones to build. You'll only build those if you're getting $100 a barrel. Upheaval in the world oil market. So Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer in the world. Usually, U.S., depending on the year, like I said, has been 1, 2, and 3. So the difference is the U.S. is kind of a private market. OPEC is like a national market in the style of socialism, where the government is calling out the price by increasing supply, right? And since they can move in unison, you can't tell all the U.S. producers individually what to charge. It's a capitalist society. But in Saudi Arabia, they'll just be like, oil, $40 a barrel, whatever the number is. And why are they doing that? They can know the price. Without price controls, the market clears at the equilibrium price and quantity. If price is regulated to be no higher than P, the quantity falls, applies to Q1. You see that, Q1. Natural gas prices rose sharply after 2000, as did the price of oil with other fuels. So you'll often see like fuel prices move together. Price controls and natural gas shortage. The free market wholesale price was $6.40 per unit. Production and consumption of gas were at 23. The average price of crude oil, which affects the supply and demand for natural gas, was about 50. One thing to keep in mind is that gas and oil are somewhat substitutable, right? You can heat your home with gas or oil, but to change it may be very difficult, right? So you would only, or you can actually heat your house with electric too, but again, it's pricey. Substitute $3 for PG in both the supply and demand equations. You should find that the supply equation gives a quantity supplied of 20.6, and the quantity demanded of 29.1. Therefore, the price controls would create an excess demand of 8.5 units. And that's it for this chapter, guys. Let me know if you have any questions, and there will be homework posted to Canvas. Please let me know if you have any questions.